Travis and I probably own like 55-gallon buckets that eventually get destroyed from doing that demo. It's like the worst. I mean, it's a bulletproof assembly, but to remove it is one of the worst demos you can do.
I'm surprised I'm not bleeding just talking about it. Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, a regular discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Fine Homebuilding Editorial Director Andrew Zellner.
Morning, Patrick.
Fine Homebuilding contributor and partner in Catalyst Construction, Joe Cook.
Good morning, guys.
And our producer, Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Gents, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank
Happy
you.
to be here.
Joe, it is a special surprise to have you here today. Thanks so much for doing this.
You're very welcome. I appreciate you guys. I read the magazine, and so this is equally as much of an honor for me.
Well, it's fun to have a real builder on the show, and we're going to grill you in the podcast after show about what it's been like running a business the last 3 years, the struggles you're having getting subcontractors you mentioned before the show, you're training your workforce because you need to, and we're going to talk about all that in today's after show, so that should be really a good conversation.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
You know, the drill here, Joe, is like the first part of the show we talk about our home projects. Can I ask, being a contractor, do you enjoy working on your own house? Do you put it off? Is it kind of a mixed bag? Do you like some stuff and not others? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, how much time do you have? So my previous house before this, I did a full gut. We basically tore it down to the studs, took out load-bearing walls, put in upset headers, redid the kitchen, HVAC, electrical, plumbing. Eventually, I even had someone do the roof. We did new deck, built a shed, and then our family just outgrew that house. And so my wife told me when we actually sold it, she's like, well, now the house is perfect. And she had been living through construction for 10 years. So the house we're currently living in, I've built a pretty awesome tree house for the kids. That's been like a little bit of therapy for me. Typically, everything we do is off blueprints, and it's a very strict design path. And I just decided, like, there's a tree right there. I'm going to build a tree house, and I'm just going to buy the material and build it. But the majority of stuff I've done is maintenance. Like, I've done my hot water heater, changed out the disposer a couple weeks ago, new toilets, shower valves, stuff like that. So I haven't really crossed into like an actual cool home project here.
When you have to get up on a Saturday morning and replace a garbage disposal, like, do you want to get a jump on it? Do you put it off as long as possible? Do you call a plumber friend ahead of the project to get advice? You are a plumber, so...
I'm a master plumber, so that would be a little embarrassing. But I have called plumbers about, it's just so much within the realm of being a plumber. There's some things you just can't do all the time. And so I have reached out for advice. I will typically try to knock it out on a weeknight. I'd rather just book in Monday through Friday and then try to have my weekends a little bit of free time, which is filled up with like soccer games and basketball games and stuff like that. But I try to, have some downtime on the weekends. So like when I did my hot water heater, I think I started it at like 6 p.m. and wrapped it up at like 10.
That's gutsy, because when you need something, you're not going to get it at 9 o'clock at night. Am I right?
No, one of the benefits of being a contractor is I have a lot of parts. And so if you have to like modify or punt, then, I can, maybe I'll use 390s here if I don't have like a 2-inch nipple.
You mentioned your wife in your first house. Was she into the remodeling process? Did she get her hands dirty on the housework?
Yeah. She's hands-on. and she'll probably hate me for saying this. My joke is I have the worst designer ever because she's like very, like she has her opinions, and it's usually I am definitely the contractor in the role of the home remodels. I kind of get told what to do, and then I do it.
That seems like knowing the score is half the battle. Andrew, what have you been doing?
So the exciting thing that happened in my life is last week I placed an order at Lowe's for a new hole saw set. I've only had frustrating experiences with hole saws, and when Spider released it's like a 4-tip carbide hole saw. I was at a different publication and got a chance to like try it, and I was like, whoa, like something's different about this. And now that I own a home and actually have to drill a bunch of bunch of hole saw size holes, I ordered the set, and it's just as good as I remember it being. So I was playing with hole saws for most of the weekend.
I think most folks would say that hole saws are a pain in the butt because the plug gets stuck in there. The teeth aren't big enough, and they hold sawdust, and then it quits drilling after a period, and you have to clean it off, right, the teeth, to keep it moving. And I also find that they loosen on the arbor pretty alarmingly often. What's different about what you got?
I'm not entirely sure from the design standpoint. I think the big thing is like instead of having a bunch of little short teeth, it has 4 big teeth essentially. That makes clearing it easier. They're also like totally sharp and fresh, which makes difference. And then it's like I haven't ever had a set of hole saws. I've had like the hole saw I bought for a specific thing in that arbor, and then like a different brand hole saw in a different arbor because I couldn't get to the same store to buy the last one. So, so having them all work together too is cool. One of the other I haven't had to use this yet, but the hole saws are set up so you can actually have 2 hole saws on the same arbor. So if you drill a hole that's slightly too small, which is a frustrating experience, you can use that original hole saw as a guide and then throw a new bigger hole saw on and still drill your hole centered in the same spot.
Cool. So what kind of drill are you using to spin these?
Just an 18-volt cordless drill. I do have a wired half-inch drill as well, but I haven't had to bust it out.
If you have to drill, I think Joe would agree, these kind of size holes with any regularity, a right angle drill is a pretty fun tool to have until it smacks you in the face.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do the pilot hole of different sizes. I'm gonna have to check that out because that's a game changer. If you misdrill your hole, typically then you have to like put a piece of plywood over it so you can start over.
Yeah.
And so that in itself might be worth the price of admission.
Do you have these carbide style hole saws, Joe?
No. We just buy, and they're really expensive, when you buy hole saws. And so we typically will we haven't bought like a set, but we all own a set. I own everything from like, a half inch up to 6 inches. But having a crew of guys, I will have to loan them out on occasion. And sometimes they come back in not so good condition. Like you're kind of wondering, like, did you try to go through stucco, maybe a nail? Like there's a nice polish on this hole saw now. So I haven't committed to like a really nice set.
It's an investment, right? They're hundreds of dollars. What'd you pay for yours, Andrew?
It was like $140 for like 13 sizes.
Wow.
Yeah, I look with great fondness on hole saw sets because I have a mix match sets of different arbors and stuff I've accumulated over decades. Jeff, do you have hole saws?
I've got a bunch of them. I've got a old set that I bought 30 years ago that are mostly all burned and dull and but the arbor's still good. So, and then, I bought piecemeal, like 4.5 inch and 6 inch for different jobs. But
I have a 4-inch one that I use for, especially outdoor electrical boxes, right? Because you always have to go through the sheathing, and it's useful for dryer outlets and other, small diameter ducts that go to the outside. And I've had that thing bind up a few times, and it really gets your attention. And I did have it hit me in the jaw one time, and it's kind of the situation where you feel your face and like, I could be really hurt. Am I hurt? I think I'm okay. And go back to work.
It's a rite of passage.
Patrick, what have you been up to?
Oh my God. So, magazine work, Andrew. I'm working on a, feature article, on, using
It's the
your
first I've heard of it.
Using your concrete batch plant as a partner in getting good concrete to your job site. And I was inspired for this feature article by a trip to Western Pennsylvania to visit my friend Andy Grace, who is pouring a giant slab in his world headquarters. So we took a field trip to the batch plant to see what goes on there and had a chance to interview their operators and learn a lot about getting concrete to your job site. And as you all might imagine, there's more to it than you think. And I've been digging into that, and it's been pretty fun, I gotta say. We talk about our home projects, and it's a surprisingly small amount of my time spent weekly, right? Because I have a 9-to-5 job like most folks, and I'm really lucky. I enjoy my work. I feel like I get excited when the new issue comes in the mail, like I'm holding up, and the first time I ever met Kevin Ireton, who was, folks may remember his name, but longtime editorial director of the Fine Homebuilding brand. We met at the Builder Show probably 20-some years ago in the press room. And I was a doe-eyed editor at JLC, and this was the first time we'd ever met. And, of course, I had a lot of questions from him, and he grilled me a little bit. And he said, well, do you like the job? And I said, oh, I love it. I still get excited when the magazine comes in the mail every day. And he's like, I dread it when that happens because it means I'm going to get a bunch of letters. And, the higher you climb on the ladder, the more that means, right? So I'm very lucky. I still love it, and I still get excited when a magazine of Fine Homebuilding comes in the mail.
I got mine yesterday, too, and I was super excited about this cover and this cover story. Like, the cover itself is just, like, visually striking. Like, you're not quite sure what you're looking at. I don't know how well it would do on the newsstand, but I think, like, our audience would immediately be like, oh, okay, there's something blue, there's some rebar. Am I looking down into a hole? Am I looking like through a hole? And the cover story is a seismic retrofit, which also was like a super interesting learning experience for me because in Minnesota, like I don't worry about earthquakes or seismic activity, but there's like a huge population of the country that does, and they're having to deal with it all the time.
Yeah, so briefly, the gist of the story is using, I believe, what is called a cantilevered column, which is a big hunk of concrete connected to a steel I-beam that's vertical and helps hold up the living space above the garage in what's called a soft story condition, which is like missing walls owing to garage doors or big openings or whatever. And it makes the house very unstable in the seismic forces. And this is meant to keep it standing upright. And Thor Madison designed this, and Olio Nieto is the contractor, and I think it's a pretty fun feature article. Even if you don't live in California, it's really interesting to know how this stuff is fixed, right?
Yeah, it's like something I will never do or be a part of unless I move to California, and it was still like super fascinating.
Yeah, it's cool stuff. So, as always, we heard from our listeners, and I do love to hear from you folks. Thank you so much for writing in. This one starts off, FHB podcasters. Subject says it all. Found your podcast about a year ago, and it's growing on me. Sort of like the show theme music. Starts off slow and plucky and then ends up sounding like something worth listening to. That's hilarious. Backstory, my father-in-law gave me a subscription to FHB for Christmas each year starting in about 1987. Oddly, he stopped that a few years ago, and I'm still trying to remember what I must have said at Thanksgiving dinner that year. I kept every copy for years until I moved from the West Coast back east and decided that the library, sadly, had made its last trip. Flash forward to today, and I'm happy to report that I am back. I just plunked down $79 to make all my drive time that much more painful, listening to you guys dispense your best guessery. But more importantly, I got my collection of FHB back in the cloud, and the cloud is much lighter than a few decades of your magazine. A quick note on the podcast where you guys exclusively discussed fasteners. Sorry I can't find which number in that lineup. It was a great listen, and I wanted to share my love of GRK Torx screws available at the big orange box store. And one of their best features is that they're reusable. My wife and I just finished building our forever home. We call it that because we aren't planning on living there forever. That's just how long it took us to build it over nights and weekends. I fell in love with the durability of these screws and used them for braces, temporary structures, covering openings with sheathing, etc. While the screws are more expensive, they do not break and are hard to bend and can be in the weather for a long time and still be backed out and driven in elsewhere without issue. I would estimate that I was able to reuse 99% of the screws that were on the job, the 1% being lost to those in a concrete form or similar harsh use. They are fabulous for cranking warped lumber into submission. One thing I did learn to make life easier on the job site is to standardize on one family of head size like T25. If you grab a box of these screws off the shelf without paying attention, you will end up needing to have to carry up to 3 Torx driver sizes in your pouch, which just slows the job down. Thank you for covering the evil practice of people using drywall screws in seemingly endless applications. Long live GRK. Thank you for keeping the discussion lively and keeping those of us building science nerds in the loop. My hat's off to everyone in the Taunton family, as everything you guys produce in text, image, and voice is spectacular. Stay healthy and prosperous in 2023, Jim. Jim says, P.S. I'm a residential technology system integrator, so if you need an expert on the same level as the quality advice you dispense weekly on the show, I'm your man. I've been in this part of the high-end residential trade since 1980, so I've seen it all, I hope, in my time. Jim Felderman, President, C2 Design, Crestron Elite Pro Dealer. I think I know what that is. Crestron is one of those home integration softwares, right, Andrew? Yeah.
I believe so, yeah.
Well, that was fun, huh? What do you think about the GRK screws, Joe?
I like them.
Yeah.
It's funny because there is a little bit of a internal battle at our company. Our younger guys love the GRK. When Travis and I were coming up, not to date ourselves, but that was a long time ago, those weren't really available at your regular box store. So we're just a standard number 2 Phillip guy. We typically will always use the exterior grade screws on everything, just because then you don't have to have multiple screws, and I feel they are stronger. But our young guys love the GRK, and so that's kind of where we're at with that.
What were you going to say, Andrew? Sorry.
I love the phrase "best guessery." Like that. That was a great summation of what we do on the podcast.
That was good. This comes from our friend Doug. Hi, all. The discussion about digital shower valves in podcast 523 reminded me of earlier attempts to modernize a valve. In 1972, we purchased what would be our home for the next 40 years. Although the house was built in 1910, the kitchen had been remodeled in the early 60s. This included the Electroway Sink Center. It replaced a simple kitchen faucet with a device that claimed to do everything. You pushed the hot or cold buttons for water and adjusted the temp with a separate knob. It also had a blender and mixer and cable-driven dish brush. Within months, I replaced this with a normal kitchen faucet. I found an example of this device online. Did you guys happen to see this? It's hilarious. It looks Jetsons, right?
Yeah, it looks like the future.
Sometimes simple is better. Who would argue?
I'm anticipating seeing something like this at the Builder Show.
This comes from Matt. Hello, FHB podcast crew. As always, episode 527 was a fantastic and informing time. I wanted to share my experiences similar to Chris's regarding Chicago's building codes. I should start by saying I'm an engineer living in Chicago and grew up helping my grandfather, who was an electrician. Mike's comments about the codes being due to the Chicago fire of 1871 made me chuckle. Yes, there are certain codes like no wood siding or shingle roofs that came out of that and still make sense in a dense urban area. The MEP codes don't have as much to do with the fire and are definitely heavily union influenced and contribute to increased housing costs in the area if they're followed. Non-metallic cable has been listed in the NEC since 1926 and widely used since the 60s. It's a joke that Chicago doesn't allow it. His comments about just using something and not saying anything hit home too. Whenever I go to my local Menards or Home Depot, I can't help but notice how much Romex is in the electrical department. Oddly, that there's so much for sale when there's almost no code approved for its use in the city. My hunch is these billion-dollar companies, which keep very good data on the products they sell, would not have it on the shelves if there wasn't a demand for it. Well, so would the home center not have it, right? They're not going to keep it if they don't sell it, unless there's a lot of temporary wiring going on that I'm unaware of. The required use of conduit presents its own issues. My brother, who also lives in the city, recently asked me to change out the switch controlling his front porch light for one with an automatic timer. I did this last month on a cold day. When I took the cover plate off, I could literally feel the breeze coming through the conduit from the outside. A house in Chicago definitely can't meet passive house standards. Our standard of 4 ACH 50 is exceedingly average. Now, was I even allowed to do that without a permit? Which of course only a licensed electrician can pull. One of the first electrical skills Grandpa taught me as a 5-year-old was never pull a permit, and I have never forgotten that piece of wisdom. The City of Chicago website is kind enough to tell me that I can change a light bulb or plug something into an existing receptacle without a permit. I'm just going to assume changing a switch is also, quote, minor electrical repair work. I shouldn't complain, though. The city is actually better than some suburbs and does let a homeowner change out a lot of equipment like water heaters, furnaces, and AC without a permit. Out in Oak Park, you can't even change out a water heater without a permit. Please don't print my last name. I don't want any union goons showing up at my door since I'm giving it away that a lot of homeowners in the city are blatantly ignoring their cost-increasing code requirements. Matt. Do you think the union goons are going to show up? I don't think so. They don't listen to this show.
Maybe not. Yeah, we have the same kind of code requirements here in Kansas City. If we're going to switch out an outlet or a switch, we're supposed to pull a permit. Hot water heaters, HVAC systems all require permits. And that triggers something. So say we do replace an outlet on a backsplash. Well, then we're required to put in smokes and carbon monoxide detectors throughout the house. So that one outlet can trigger $1,000 of extra parts because we have to do them. They have to be wireless because we're obviously not going to tear out all the drywall to put it in. So, and I get it. Life safety, that's an important thing in my book. So as a contractor, we'll typically just follow the protocol of whatever jurisdiction we're in. About Home Depot, though, you do have to watch because even in our area, we're allowed to use Romex, but they have a ton of products out on the shelves that do not meet. They might have an ASTM certification, but they actually don't meet the local code. We have one jurisdiction we work in where it's the primer and glue in one for plumbing connections. I think it's I won't say the brand, but
Odie?
It's their Rain and Shine, I think. It's just the blue. You can use it like subterranean, but it's listed technically for interior of the house, but our jurisdiction won't allow it. You have to use a primer every time. So you just need to be aware of those things. And yes, it does add to cost, but ultimately we're about, serving our client and making sure that we get that final inspection passed.
And Travis is an electrician, right? You mentioned you're a licensed plumber, and Travis is a licensed electrician. And I'm hoping that's something else we can talk about in the after show, why you guys
Yeah.
went to the trouble of getting those licensures and how it helps your business. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I'd be happy to discuss that.
Because we have a licensed plumber here and we're talking about code and permissive code, Joe, how do you feel about air admittance valves?
There's only one brand I'll buy, and you have to use them in a specific. I'll use them under a sink on an exterior wall, mainly because when we do a remodel, you tear out the kitchen and you see this pipe that's been cut through like 3 or 4 studs, including the jack and the king studs, and you're not allowed to do that. So our city official will give us a pass. I prefer an air admittance valve to like a vent loop. I think sometimes those can be finicky, but you have to buy. There's typically like 2 or 3 tiers of them. I think our air admittance valve is about $40, and so you buy the high end one. You follow the instructions on where to install it, so it really needs to be at that flood rim, and then it has to be accessible. And as far as any other applications, we're doing a front porch edition, and we had to get rid of the stack for the roof so we could put on a new roof. I have an air admittance valve there in a temporary setting in the attic, and it is working because the homeowner, I told him what I was doing. I said, if you get sewer smells, let us know because we'll be over immediately to, do a different plan. And, 4 days later, they're like, we can't even notice and everything works fine. So I think in the right application, they're fine. But I see so many examples of it being done poorly where they're hidden in a wall and they're not a forever part, that might, I don't know, but to take a guess, 5 to 10 year lifespan. Because it is a rubber gasket, and so it's probably subject to drying out over time.
Do you like the Studer variant, Joe? Can I guess?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this one temporary application you talked about that is serving the whole house is that on like a 3 or 4 inch vent stack? They come pretty big, right?
It's on a 3. We reduced it to 2, so we could. And like I said, it's temporary, so we're probably looking at only about a 30-day install on it. But I still bought the $40 Studer vent because I didn't want to buy the cheap one.
Yeah.
Well, and if you consider your time, that extra $20 is well worth it if it performs.
Are they not allowed otherwise by code in your jurisdiction?
I can't, I don't know. I think they're allowed. I think it's up to the discretion of the inspector. Like I could see one being used maybe in a laundry room. I don't know. I wouldn't want it in a basement or a laundry room. Like a kitchen, like a kitchen sink isn't going to pull that much. And so, and typically we oversize, well, previous code, I think now it's required as a 2-inch pipe. Yeah. But previous code was 1.5 inches, and we've always done 2-inch since like the early 2000s. Okay. It's like you figure, you see what people put down their garbage disposals. You're like, there's no way that's going to work with 1.5 inch pipe over time.
Do you have a garbage disposal? You just mentioned you do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I try to be as strict as possible about what we put down it. Do not put eggshells down there. No grease or anything like that. Really, the trash can is where you put your waste. The sink is where you just get the little bit of, we call it like gradu that's left on your plate.
We got a great question from let's see, Matt. He says, many of the topics in the podcast seem to focus on detached single-family homes, so I wonder if you could discuss any special considerations or differences when it comes to the missing middle housing townhouses, duplexes, small multi-unit buildings, or row houses that have the basement dug out and a third story added, which are then split into two-story condos. I'm interested in these specifically because they are typically built in a similar way as the detached homes discussed on the podcast. I live in a row house in Washington, D.C., which is experiencing a housing shortage much like other cities in the country. And these kinds of structures are increasingly looking like the most effective way to increase housing availability in urban areas. From my own experience, I know there are at least some differences. For example, our house, built in the 1920s, doesn't fall neatly into either leaky or airtight category. The front and back walls that are exposed to the exterior are drafty, but the interior of the house has relatively poor ventilation. CO2 gets up to around 1,200 parts per million with the windows closed and 2 adults working from home. These houses are also affected by issues with neighboring structures. I've lived in more than one place that was adjacent to a hollow shell with a missing wall or roof. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about how to best build or renovate these types of structures, both from the perspective of a builder working on working on a set of homes in a cluster, and from an individual homeowner of a single unit. So I had some questions for Matt because this is a big subject, and I wanted to know more about his house. He says the original structure is masonry. However, the previous owners finished the sleeping porch area on the main and upper floors, so I think there's probably wood framing at the very back. The previous owners did a light renovation of the house, updating the kitchen, finishing the porch, finishing half the basement, though a lot of the work seems to be a little slapdash or DIY. I'm not sure if the quality or code compliance. Evaluating that work to see if anything needs to be redone is part of why I'm asking. We have hot water radiator heat and AC unit on the roof. We replaced the gas boiler with a conventional 80% efficiency unit when the old boiler bit the dust a few years ago. We wanted a direct vent, but it wasn't at the budget at the time. The electrical panel was updated to 150 amp service, though most of the house still has its original cloth wiring. Only the basement and finished areas in the back have updated wiring. The windows are 10 years old, but not particularly high quality. The renovated back porch seems fairly poorly insulated because they're significantly colder than the main house in the winter. The main floor area in particular has a cold feel. It overhangs the foundation and is open below. I asked Matt if there was anything he wanted to change about this house specifically. He says, ventilation is one thing that comes to mind. The house is sort of a contradictory combination of both stuffy and drafty, which gets a little frustrating. We'd also love to put in solar panels, but the house to our south has a pop-up third story that casts a shadow on a roof, and I'm not sure how to make it work. The other issue is that presumably due to space constraints, the AC unit on the roof, and when there's heavy rain, we get some water coming in through the ductwork. I'm not sure what the exact cause is or how to address it. Do we need to put a little elevated cover on the fan intake, like a cap on a chimney? I'd also be interested in general tips on the best bang for the buck to create more usable space, like turning the deck into a screened porch. We talked with a couple of design build firms about popping the house back, and it was shockingly expensive, like $300,000. So we're thinking about more affordable options. The little backyard prefab shed is one thing we're doing along those lines. We have 2 young kids, and it's a somewhat small house, and we'd love to stay, but it's getting a little cramped. Okay, what do you guys think? Did you have a look at this house? It's very cute, right?
It is very cute, and it's like it feels very it feels very like turn of the century DC. Like you've got neighbors close to you. It looks like it's in a like walkable neighborhood. It like has all of the things somebody would want in somewhere they were living. Except that like you have to share some walls with your neighbors, which can be frustrating sometimes. Yeah.
Joe, do you have housing like this in the Kansas City area?
We do, but it's a little bit, it's more modern. It's been built in the last 20 years. I think, we have a couple areas where in the older parts of the city where you still see like, it might be 3 houses together, like a row house. We worked on one. All the problems this person described were at this house. It's just when you're dealing with 100 year-old structure, it's just really hard to update them correctly. I think the brick on both sides is probably contributing to the stuffiness, but then the air leakage is contributing to the draftiness. And, that's a hard riddle to solve. It kind of depends on how far do you want to go with this? Because we can definitely solve it, but I'm trying to think what's the low hanging fruit in this? If you could do it and you could figure out a way to route it, Panasonic makes a pretty affordable ERV. You'd probably end up with one per floor, but that would be a way to bring in some fresh air and exhaust the stale air. Even a really good bath fan that you put on a timer would probably help. But it really, and then to putting in the shed, I think that's one of your best bangs for your buck. Because when you have a family, you always are bursting at the seams with stuff, it seems like, at least in my house. And so I can't fit in my garage, but my garage, I've never parked in the garage because it's always storage. And, if you can put in a shed for, even $2,000 for a nice fiberglass or rubber shed, that's, you've gained 120 square feet. And with Rubbermaids and shelves, you can fit a lot of stuff in there. And so that would free up spaces to do other things in actual living space.
Jeff, have you ever lived in a place like this, or do you have thoughts on this kind of build?
The only time I ever lived in anything like this was a duplex in Buffalo, and that was probably turn of the 19th century, or turn of the 20th century kind of structure. But I was just living that was when I was in college, so I was just living in a room in the attic. So,
mm-hmm. Did you have trouble with your neighbors, making noise or?
No, actually, because it was a minister and his wife, so really pretty quiet people.
What were you going to say, Andrew? Sorry.
So it seems like dealing with structural issues in attached housing is the trickiest part of living attached to somebody else, especially with masonry and old buildings. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about as I'm planning projects for when it gets warm here. It's warm in Washington D.C. a lot more than it is in Minnesota, and optimizing that outdoor space I think is a great bang for your buck if you have if you need more space and you're kind of limited on your footprint. I wanted to mention the article Tino Govan did in the new issue of Fine Homebuilding. It's on our website too, about there are visual and aesthetic tricks you can do to make your outdoor space feel bigger, even on a small lot. And I think a shed for storage is great. And then being precious about your outdoor space in a way that maybe he isn't right now. Although I do think you get some pretty crazy humidity and probably some bug stuff going on in the DC area.
Matt, it's a complicated question, and I don't think there's any easy answers. But I think one easy answer is you need a home performance auditor, contractor, BPI certified, or what's the other one? Can't think of right now. ResNet, yeah, thank you. To do a blower door test and evaluate your house and figure out where the air leakage is. The cantilevered section in the back, that seems like almost certainly a problem. That's seldom done correctly. But they're going to be able to tell you where the big holes are, and then I think, as Joe suggested, get some kind of ventilation system to exchange the air so you don't have that CO2 building up in there and making you drowsy while you're trying to work. And I'd say send the kids to daycare, build yourself a shed in the back. Don't even tell them about it. Just keep keep it as your own personal hiding space. And yeah. What do you guys think? I mean, we need to cover this type of housing more, I think, in Fine Homebuilding, right, Andrew?
Absolutely. I was just also thinking, the term brownstone in Minneapolis is used more as like a marketing term than like describing any sort of actual building. But with limited land area and urban spaces, like people are going to be living closer together and likely attached to each other.
And boy, with the price of housing, it is a way to make things way more affordable, right? You're building and often half the exterior walls at a minimum. The one big challenge I see with adjoined structures like this is the roof. And, if your neighbor is not able to afford a new roof when you need it or doesn't want to spend the money on it, I think that can be a big problem. But Diami, owing to their work in New York City, has figured out ways to do these edge treatments that allow you to do part of the asphalt shingle roof on a structure like this with connected roofs. And I'm at a loss to explain it, but it has like a horizontal leg that goes under the new roof, a vertical leg that turns up, and then a pair of other legs that do like a 90-degree turn, and it hangs over the old shingles on your neighbor's roof, and it allows them to replace them when they get a chance, but it also means that your roof is no longer leaking over your unit. So it seemed pretty smart, and that's the one thing that's always scared me about this, and noise. And, once again, if you have an audit, air leaks are often the greatest source of noise leakage from adjoining structures. So you might solve some of those issues too. Okay, question 2 from Steven. Greetings, podcast crew from the Space Coast of Florida. I'm renovating our 5x8 master bath in our 1964 cement block home and removing the tub to make a baller stand-up shower with fancy things to make my wife and I feel fancy. I demoed everything down to the studs, which mostly consisted of hundreds of pounds of 2-inch thick walls of metal lath, plaster, thin set, and pink tile. This troublesome and sharp lath monstrosity was everywhere, including the sill of the window. When it came to the window, I could not separate the tile from the plaster/lath nightmare, and the result is what you see in the photos. Technically rubble. I told my wife it was fine and that it wasn't a big deal, so please help me make it not a big deal. The current completely uneducated plan is 1. Remove the window and demo the rest of the lath plaster. 2. Spray in some gap filler foam into the cavities to create a base, because I'm not putting lath back down. It sucks, and I refuse to believe man hasn't moved on from this technology in 2023. Screw a board into the wall to create a continuous form to put mortar in to rebuild the base for finishing for tile, marble, or whatever the sill will be. All right, that's the plan. I think it sucks, but I can't seem to find anyone in the whole of the Google that has ever seen anything similar. And how do you describe this in a Google search? Additionally, I can't seem to find anything similar in FHB archives that I finally got for Christmas last year. Do any of you have experience with this? Is my plan the best option? Is there anything that could help that you've seen at IBS or something? Should I just burn the house down and collect the insurance money so I can restart my FHB subscription? Thanks for your help, Stephen. Stephen has a PS. Patrick, random question. In your work with Habitat, did you ever meet Jimmy Carter? He always looks like he smells like fresh baked chocolate chip cookies. Is this true? If not, don't tell me. Man, it's a treasure, and I want to live in a world where Jimmy Carter smells like delicious cookies. So, Stephen, the most common
first, Patrick,
question...
we need to know if you've met Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Stephen, the most common question people had for me when I worked at Habitat for Humanity was, had I met Jimmy Carter? And sadly, the answer is no, I have not. But I am a fan, too, and it delighted me to see him with his bruised face most recently at the Jimmy Carter work camp. Despite a fall, he was out there pounding nails and doing carpentry and seems like a genuinely fine human being. So I hope I get to meet him, too, Stephen.
Have you met other celebrities in your Habitat world? And we can define celebrity in whatever way you'd like.
Boy, Andrew, I can't say I have. I may have met a couple local newscasters in the Pittsburgh area in my time at the Pittsburgh Habitat for Humanity. But describing them as celebrities would perhaps be a stretch. But yeah, I'm I'm at the point in my career now where you can't help but start thinking, what will I do when I no longer have a 9-to-5 job? And I'm not that old, but these are things that go through your mind. And I still think very fondly of my time spent at Habitat. And there is a group of Habitat volunteers that travel the country in RVs doing home builds called Caravanners. And the Caravanners are a welcoming group, and I think, at least part of my time might be spent doing that if I could convince Carol. What do you guys think?
I think that sounds awesome. You may meet some local celebrities doing Habitat, but like the work itself is just so fun and rewarding that like you're not going to care like who's standing next to you on a ladder, unless maybe it was Jimmy Carter.
I don't think this is a big deal, Steven. Am I right, Joe, Andrew, Jeff? Like this isn't a big deal, right?
It's definitely not the end of the world. If I was going to make a sill, you definitely want to fill it. I'd use like the hydrostatic cement or something. Mm-hmm. But I'd probably, if you had to build a new sill, I'd use like AZIC, and then I'd probably wrap it in like a Durarock, and then use Red Guard and just waterproof, like 3 coats. And then the connection between the window and the block, I'd really want to make sure that's sealed up well. And I'd use a high quality sealant so no water is getting out. And obviously you don't want it coming in either. But that's kind of where I would start. I wouldn't use spray foam or wood in the repair.
We should explain. So this block wall has the top damaged from where the windowsill was, right? And obviously the expanded metal lath was wrapped up to there and filled with mortar, almost certainly. And I can understand why that was so hard to get apart. And that stuff is awful. It is. I'm with Steven. It is a horrible material. Am I right, Joe?
Oh, I have nightmares about it. It weighs so much. Like if we, at our company, when we've done demo of that stuff, we typically have to bring it out in buckets. So Travis and I probably own like 55-gallon buckets that eventually get destroyed from doing that demo. It's like the worst. I mean, it's a bulletproof assembly, but to remove it is one of the worst demos you can do.
I'm surprised I'm not bleeding just talking about it, because honestly, I look at this stuff and my hands start bleeding from gashes.
I'd say that window looks a lot like how my egress window looked when I cut through my concrete block wall to put it in. And it, I just paid attention to sealing the outside from water, and I used a wood exterior plywood, like I made a buck for my window, and just sealed it. Obviously, I'm not taking a shower next to this window or anything, so I'm not worried about water from the inside getting out. But it was like scary to see, like not understanding exactly what it would look like after the dust settled and I'd put down the saw. But yeah, it's still structurally just fine, and you gotta seal it and make it look nice and flat.
Yeah, in a basement application, exterior plywood would work great. I just have a little bit of concern just with, you figure if there's 2 people living in the house, that's 2 exposures every day. And and if you did use, a treated material, the key, I think, is still doing like the Red Guard.
It has to be waterproofed, right? And it has to be surface applied so that stuff doesn't get wet, because it's horizontal, which is way less forgiving than something that's completely vertical.
We've actually gone to, if we're not doing like a Schluter system or something, I say that in air quotes, some sort of waterproofing system in a shower, then we'll go with a Durarock is pretty much our baseline. But then our tile setter, we do 2 coats of Red Guard on everything before we start laying tile. And I think what's good for this gentleman is you can get all those materials at the box store, and they're all reasonably priced. So it is a good DIY solution for this.
I want to say, Stephen, you scored a touchdown with regard to the first rule of home remodeling, and that's tell the significant other that whatever you did is not a problem, because there's no need for two people to be anxious about this. Right? Joe, before the podcast after show, the BS Building Science Symposium, Midwest Building Science Symposium is coming up, and you guys have been instrumental in the launching and running of this thing. Do you want to tell folks who listen to this show why they should go there, what they'll learn, and maybe start by explaining the genesis of it all?
Yeah. So the genesis actually started with the Fine Homebuilding Summit. Travis and I, we saw it online, and we were excited about it. I will say Travis was over the moon. Like the day it was announced, we have to buy our tickets now. It's going to sell out. And so we bought them and we made the plans. And at this stage in our work or careers, we really hadn't been doing a lot of traveling to go see and get educated. And we kind of had our bucket list of things we wanted to do. So we went to it and our minds were just blown. We're like, oh my gosh, these are all the people we read about. These are the people, that we look up to in the industry. And then, you go to classes all day and then you hang out afterwards with other like-minded builders and people in the industry. And it was just such I'd say it was a life-changing experience. So then, fast forward, we're back in Kansas City and we said, we're going to start our own discussion group. And we did that for a while and it was great, not massive numbers, but, we get 20 to 40 people every month and we do discussions. And then we decided like, hey, let's have our own event in Kansas City. And it was really, looking at back in hindsight, it was not well planned out. We own a construction company. We're not event promoters or planners or have any idea what goes into that. But, we pulled it together for 2 years. And then, the next logical step was, well, why don't we try to make it multiple cities? Because we were getting other BS and beer groups from around the country like, hey, let's do this in our city. And so this year we launched it and it didn't go as planned. We thought we'd do one per quarter. We ended up doing 3 in 2 quarters. And this is the 4th event of that. So, why you should go? Because if you're in the industry at all, or you're just a homeowner who likes building science, this is a very approachable way to get into it. It's an intimate space. We usually have it at a brewery. It's limited seating, so it caps out 100, 120 people. And you can hear from people like Jake Bruton, Steve Basic. We touch on Peter Yost is joining us in Silver Springs, Maryland. We have Allison Bales, Glenn Mathewson, and Mariana Pickering from Emu Passive House. And so it starts out with, we kind of hit the basics of building science, which is the control layers. Then that goes into air quality. Glenn touches on code, and then we kind of wrap it up with the passive house. So it starts off, low-hanging fruit and just basic water management details all the way to the, what we hope someday is the industry standard of being close to all our homes. New homes are close to a passive house build as far as indoor air quality, water management, and really just comfort of living. So
what I found most impressive about the curriculum was that it talked about building science principles in the first part of the show, right? Like the why. And then the second half of the show, after you're introduced to these things that are so important, it talks about how to do it in real life applications. Can you talk a little bit about that? I'm sure that's intentional, right?
Yes, very intentional. And my business partner, Travis, really was the brainchild behind this. And, we worked together on it. And really, this is essentially almost the same curriculum with a little bit of tweaks and changes that our first symposium was. So we wanted to make it approachable. We wanted to do it in a kind of a linear pattern where it starts out like, the control layers, your 4 control layers are the most important part of your house. And really, if you solve for 3 of them correctly, the 4th one isn't as important. And so, yeah, that's, it was intentional, and we really didn't want to make it too high level. Like, we want to make it a hybrid of that. So a builder that, hey, I'm a production builder and I've been doing, 80% right for my whole career. You can go there and learn something. An architect can come, and we've gotten now where we're getting AI credits for it. So they can come get their credits and maybe figure out ways to incorporate some of these details into their designs. And then, just people that are, building scientists as a hobby, they can go there and just know, like, hey, on my next project on my own personal house, these are the things the key points I need to be paying attention to on my projects.
And you have exhibitors too, right? So industry partners go there, and you can actually talk to folks who make the things that make better housing and talk to someone who is very knowledgeable about those products. Am I right?
Yeah, and that was also part of it. I don't want to say we're exclusive, but we want sponsors that we believe in their products. And and we have this great, other contributing partner that like does a podcast there. If anyone wants to check that out. The support of Fine Homebuilding is also, I attribute that to the growth of it and just the overall success of the event.
And so when is this next event, Joe?
Okay, it's right around the corner. It is February 23rd and 24th in Silver Branch Brewing Company in Silver Springs, Maryland. You can get on our website at bsandbeerkc.org. Registration's on that page. It's $110 to kind of reserve your spot. All proceeds go to Keep Craft Alive, local building trade school. So we're trying to give back as much as possible throughout all this. And that's kind of been something Travis and I, like the first year we didn't really have anything in place for that, but it was also a free event. Our second year it was still free. And then we did a raffle, and we got donated tools and products, and people bought tickets, and we were able to contribute to 3 local building trade schools. And then the problem is we would, we get 200 people to sign up, and then we'd still have a great turnout, but, we'd have 50 empty seats. And so this is just a way of like streamlining the process, and, it's expensive to put on an event. So we don't want to buy food for 200 people. We'd rather just buy it for what we need. And it's so far, the amount of money we're able to donate is, 400% higher than what we were able to do doing a raffle.
That's fantastic. I was also if Matt is listening, he's in the DC area. This is just right next door. It'd be a great place to go and get some of your questions about your row home answered.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's part of going to different parts of the country is everyone has different problems to solve. And so, Matt's definitely more I wouldn't call it commercial, but, more of a row home type, group living than we are in the Midwest, where it's primarily just houses. Mm-hmm. We went to Chattanooga, they deal with so much more humidity, and they have termite issues, and we're hoping to get up to Minnesota. I don't want to announce our next stops, but we're hoping to get to your neck of the woods, and you have a completely different set of issues than we do here in the Midwest. So it's ever evolving.
It's and I'm gonna say it's fun.
It is so much fun.
It's so fun.
Yeah, that's running a business can be a grind at times. And I've really found that this kind of gave Travis and I a new inspiration. It's definitely been a passion project. And it's truly a non-for-profit when it comes down to it. And so it inspires us, going places, meeting people, talking to, different builders. I've talked to homeowners, I've talked to architects, and just different industry partners also. It just kind of gets you out of your bubble and gives you a 2-day break from your reality. And you get to talk about what you're really interested in is just building better houses.
It's a nerd fest, and boy, is it awesome,
yeah.
I gotta say. Well, Joe, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, guys.
You all are going to want to stay tuned because we're going to talk to Joe more about running a business, training help, and dealing with the challenges of running a construction business over the last few years. So you'll want to stay tuned for that. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Joe, Andrew, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Stay tuned for the after show.